Now for our program, David Haynes, Ideas Lab editor for the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel, will introduce our speaker. David, come on up.
Thanks, President Karen. So George Stanley has been the leader of the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel newsroom since 1997, first as managing editor and as editor since 2015. Throughout that time, he's worked to build a culture that encourages people in our newsroom to innovate and aspire to greater things. The Journal Sentinel focuses on the strengths that distinguish it from other regional news organizations. Our in-depth investigative journalism, for example, breaking news for digital platforms, expert beat coverage in government, politics, sports, business, and entertainment. For the past 5 years, George has also been the leader of the USA Today Network Wisconsin, which includes the Green Bay Press Gazette, the Appleton Post-Crescent, and 8 other newspapers in Wisconsin. Now, the public's response to our reporting in recent years has been tremendous. The Journal Sentinel staff has literally won every major national journalism award, including 3 Pulitzer Prizes since 2008. And I think this is actually more impressive, 10 Pulitzer finalists since 2003, which indicates over a long period of time a standard of excellence in journalism. Just this year, the Journal Sentinel's Wires and Fires investigation of reckless wiring in Milwaukee's oldest and poorest neighborhoods was named a finalist for the gold medal in public service from the Pulitzer Committee. And the other 2 finalists, the Washington Post and the New York Times. George is the past president of the News Leaders Association. He serves on the board of the Wisconsin Newspaper Association, and he is the founder of the O'Brien Fellowships in Public Service Journalism at Marquette University, which allows an experienced reporter from around the country to spend an academic year with students working on an in-depth reporting project. George has done a lot of things in his career. He was business editor at the Milwaukee Sentinel, which is where I first met him. He hired me in 1994, and he's been my boss ever since. So I stayed at the Journal all these years for one reason, and he's sitting right over there. George last spoke at Rotary just a few years ago with our late beloved colleague Meg Jones after they both returned from reporting trips to Afghanistan. So on a personal note, George is a fine newspaper editor. He's nationally recognized for his work. He is also a very fine person. Please join me in welcoming George Stanley.
Thanks so much, Dave. I was in Glendale last night helping my daughter, and I went by the old Residence Inn on Good Hope in Port Washington, where you stayed in 1994, your first week at work, and I picked you up on the way to work. And I looked at that place and I thought, you know, that hotel looks exactly the same as it did then, just like you and me. I appreciate the chance to talk about our work at the Journal Sentinel and the growing importance of subscriber and community support to the kind of independent, fact-based reporting that I believe is essential to informing our democracy. Earlier this year, I was flipping through channels and Turner Classic Movies was playing Marty, the 1950s classic with Ernest Borgnine. In the opening scene, Marty is walking through a tavern looking for a friend. And virtually every person in that crowded bar is holding an afternoon newspaper. In the booths, people were half talking to one another and half looking through the paper at the same time. It was exactly like you would see today, only you'd replace the newspaper with one of these. Of course, people can do a lot more on these things than check what's new. They can text their friends, they can post on social media, they can watch videos, look up facts, pay bets, do some shopping, order just about anything, and have it directly delivered to their home. These devices are transforming our economy as much as the automobile did 100 years ago. Brad Smith, the president of Microsoft, was here in town about 3 years ago. And he said that economists and historians have only lately realized how much the Model T contributed to the depths of the Great Depression, because so many people had jobs that were connected to horse-drawn transportation. And it made me think of the scene in Seabiscuit where Jeff Bridges finds his horse whisperer cooking over a hobo campfire. Last week, news came out that Fiserv will be moving into the old Boston store building downtown. The Boston store was the Journal Sentinel's biggest advertiser. American TV was right up there with them. Circuit City was the biggest insert advertiser in the Journal Sentinel. Craigslist did not exist in Milwaukee until the 21st century, and online classifieds took a while after that to take off. In 1999, the Journal Sentinel set a record for revenue, and 40% of it came from classified ads, which all but disappeared from print over the next decade. But we need to be informed. We're a self-governing society, and knowing what's going on makes that possible. Our democratic republic depends on it. When French political philosopher Alexis de Tocqueville set out almost 200 years ago to describe the American experiment in democracy to his European peers, he wrote, "The greatness of America lies not in being more enlightened than any other nation, but rather in her ability to repair her faults." You don't have to spend much time working for the free press that our nation's founders established to witness firsthand just how America repairs her faults. Independent reporters shine a light on a problem for all to see. Wherever possible, they also report about successful ways that others are addressing similar challenges. Once a large number of citizens become aware of the problem and can see a better pathway, they demand improvements from their government officials, their political representatives, and their community institutions. Without calls for improvement from an informed citizenry, things generally stay the same, and problems often get progressively worse. I've got a few dramatic examples of how this kind of reporting serves our community. In the early 2000s, intense stretches of summer heat were bringing waves of death to a certain group of vulnerable individuals in our city. Their lonely deaths drew little attention. Thankfully, reporter Meg Kissinger took note. She understood what can happen when illness strikes not a person's lungs or their heart, but the organ in charge of thoughts, emotions, and behavior, and how little empathy or aid these people often receive. 2 people she loved deeply had lost their lives to illnesses that attacked their minds. Meg investigated the deaths and uncovered a huge fault. Due to federal court decisions arising from a 1970s case here in Milwaukee County, adults with even severe mental conditions could no longer be treated in institutions without their own consent unless law enforcement and courts determined they were in imminent danger. The court action prompted the release of people from mental health centers in cities across America. Many places had since found humane ways of providing housing for people who had been receiving institutional care, but not here, where they were largely left to fend for themselves. Meg found hundreds of people living and dying in squalor as money for their care was deposited directly into bank accounts of unscrupulous landlords. As for the heat waves, medications for mental disorders can hinder body temperature regulation. When hot weather rolled in, people taking these pills did not feel a normal need for relief from air conditioning or fans if they were available. They were dying of heat stroke. One story led to another. Meg found people so ill they could not find the way to a bathroom on their own, living in deplorable conditions. She also searched for places doing a better job. She found a model in Columbus, Ohio, which was spending less taxpayer money than Milwaukee County on mental health care and providing clean, safe apartments for people struggling with these conditions. Their apartment buildings included a nurse on site around the clock to make sure medications were working and to get residents help long before their behavior deteriorated to the point where police needed to be called. Her reporting sparked a public call for action that prompted Mayor Tom Barrett and County Executive Scott Walker to set aside their political differences and work towards solutions. Mercy House, a charity based in Chicago, offered to help. Soon, 6 new apartment buildings were constructed in Milwaukee with nurses on site. This greatly improved the lives of thousands of struggling people in our community, as well as their families. Success begets success. Next, Meg took on perpetual dysfunction at the county's mental health complex, where people were taken often by police after they became so ill that they were determined to be a danger to themselves or others. She used data to prove that Milwaukee County's mental health complex focused less on continual care and more on emergency psychiatric treatment than any other complex in the nation. 1 of every 3 patients in its emergency room returned within 90 days. 1 woman was admitted 196 times in 6 years, an average of once every 11 days. Public outcry from her reporting led to bipartisan legislative action that improved mental health care statewide and removed authority over the complex from the County Board of Supervisors and put it in the hands of medical health professionals. As the reforms took effect, a reader sent us this note. I had to get in touch with you regarding my sister's recent visit at the Milwaukee County Mental Health Complex. She's been chronically mentally ill for decades now and has been to the county more than 24 times on police holds, etc. On our last visit, at my insistence, I was met with a stern, "No, I am not going there. They are awful," from my sister. But she eventually agreed. I was stunned, frankly. She stabilized after agreeing to take her meds. The staff was very responsive to her and our family, but what was most stunning was the aftercare. They fixed her up in an assisted living situation. They called us on nights and weekends during her initial stay at county, and they followed her several weeks now post-hospitalization. It's incredible. My sister is responding. Frankly, our family owes this to you. Things seem to have genuinely changed. Another example. One afternoon, an experienced health and science writer got a phone call from a doctor at Children's Hospital of Wisconsin. The doctor was under great stress. He had just saved the life of a 5-year-old infant who had arrived by flight to life from a small hospital in central Wisconsin. The ammonia levels in the baby's blood were so high that the medical literature told the doctor he should make him as comfortable as possible until he died. But the doctor felt he had to try to save the baby's life, and he did. Now he wasn't sure if he had done the right thing. Had the baby's brain been destroyed? Would he be in a vegetative state or severely disabled? In addition to being traumatized, the doctor was furious. The child had a rare genetic condition that should not be life-threatening or even harmful if diagnosed within 4 days. Every newborn in America has her heel pricked for a blood screening test shortly after birth to detect these genetic conditions. The tests are supposed to be sent within 48 hours to a lab for diagnosis. If that had happened in this case, the baby could have been treated with sugar water, and released from the hospital in good health. They're batching. They're all doing it. You've got to stop it, the doctor shouted into the phone. The reporter had never heard the term batching before. He went to another health reporter with decades of experience who had also never heard the term. They began to investigate. All over the country, they found state newborn screening lab sites warning medical professionals, do not batch. It turned out that hospitals across the nation were holding on to newborn screening samples, sometimes for days, before shipping a batch of them together to the state lab to save a little bit of money in overnight shipping expenses or courier transportation costs. Adding to the problem, some state labs were closed on weekends and for 3 days in a row on holiday weekends. So as our reporters found, a baby born with one of these conditions on a Tuesday in Colorado was a healthy 19-month-old toddler. Another baby born at the same time with the same condition on a Friday had died because the test wasn't conducted in time. We added data reporters to the team, and we were able to get newborn screening information from more than 30 states. It didn't matter if the hospital served wealthy or poor regions, we checked. The Eastside Manhattan Hospital, where Beyonce and Jay-Z had their baby, was doing a terrible job meeting newborn screening standards. Only one state was doing newborn screening right, Iowa. Iowa's director of newborn screening made sure that every test from every hospital was delivered to the state lab in time to meet all medical standards so that each genetic condition could be spotted within that crucial 4-day window. Iowa also found that health insurance companies readily paid the $50 or so it cost to get the labs in on time. Iowa is a big state with hospitals far away from their state lab. So when other states and hospital systems made excuses about their budgets and logistics and how it was way more difficult than we realized, our reporters just said, well, Iowa does it. Their excuses evaporated. We built interactive databases so people could look up newborn screening results from individual hospitals in all the states where we could get data. I think it ended up being 36 states before we were done. The landscape changed overnight. Babies' lives were saved immediately. When little Juniper Horrock's life was saved the week that Utah put a new screening delivery system in place, state health officials actually gave the Journal Sentinel credit. After deadly delays, our reader sent reporters Mark Johnson, John Fauber, and Ellen Gabler this note. For many years, I was a practicing neonatologist and pediatrician in Milwaukee, and I realized the reluctance of hospitals to express transport the newborn blood test to Madison for evaluation. And it seemed that no amount of suggestions or urging by the pediatric community here had any impact. What the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel articles have accomplished is remarkable. It has taken on national impact. Thank you to you and the wonderful journalists who have taken a part in this spectacular achievement. This is how America repairs her faults. This is the most important work we do. It's also the most expensive work we do. So how do we keep doing it when revenue is declining? How do we adapt to the changes and transform ourselves to meet these challenges? We prioritize, we innovate, we built interactive databases so people can look up the newborn screening results at the hospital where their babies will be delivered. We find ways to reach people who did not grow up in a house with a newspaper delivered each day and who filter their news through TikTok, Instagram, or other social networks. We resurrected our public investigator team this fall to track down tips from readers anywhere in the state about corruption, wrongdoing, incompetence, or other problems affecting people's day-to-day lives. In our first PI report, which came out earlier this month, we tested the water systems of 40 communities across Wisconsin for forever chemicals contamination, filling in gaps where state and local officials have been slow to respond. These compounds do not break down and instead accumulate in our bodies over time. They've been associated with a variety of ills in lab animals, from cancerous tumors and reproductive problems to increased cholesterol levels. We found levels of the odorless, colorless chemicals above EPA health recommendations at 12 sites, or 30% of those we tested. We also found elevated levels in 2 water supplies that the state had previously determined were free of contamination. We did that on purpose. We wanted to see how good the state testing was. An earlier version of Public Investigator proved to be too successful for its own good. It launched in 2007 with reporters Raquel Rutledge and Ellen Gabler. They ran down tips and wrote stories that helped, for example, save the house of a man the city was foreclosing on because a van parked in his driveway had expired license plates. They exposed an unscrupulous furniture store owner who would take advance payments from customers, close his store before delivering the goods, and then reopen somewhere else under a new name. They tested beer tap lines in local taverns and found some caked with bacteria because, unlike in most states, no law required establishments to clean their keg lines in Wisconsin. Eventually, they received tips that led to huge investigations. Raquel, for example, exposed massive fraud in the state's subsidized child care program, saving taxpayers tens of millions of dollars and winning the 2010 Pulitzer Prize for local reporting with Cashing In on Kids. Ellen led the data reporting for our deadly delays investigation on newborn screening. She then left us for the New York Times, and she was part of the team that won the 2018 Pulitzer Prize in Public Service for its reporting on sexual harassment and abuse in Hollywood and other major institutions. And that team was actually co-led by another former Journal Sentinel reporter, Megan Toohey. And if you're interested, The movie She Said opened this week in theaters across Milwaukee, and Carey Mulligan is playing Megan Twohey in the movie. We're learning what's working in other places and adapting. 5 years ago, we had 13,000 digital-only subscribers, mostly from people from out of state who were interested in our Packers coverage. We had not tried to grow that at all for years. Our business side did not see any potential in it. Then we learned that the Boston Globe had shifted the primary attention of its entire business to digital circulation growth, because it was the only area of its business that was growing, and it was growing by double digits. Boston was up to 90,000 digital-only subscribers at that time, with 80% of them bringing in $30 a month, $360 a year, and no print or delivery costs. That could support many of our newsrooms, that amount of revenue. And those digital subscribers were paying directly for the news stories. They weren't paying for the advertising that surrounded them. So we made digital circulation growth our primary focus. We now have more than 60,000 digital-only subscribers in Milwaukee and over 100,000 in our USA Today Wisconsin network. The Globe is up to 240,000 digital-only subscribers, and it believes it can double that. We also work far more freely today than we did in the past with partners who share our values. We created a fellowship program with Marquette University's journalism school. It was modeled after the Nieman Fellowships at Harvard University, which were started nearly a century ago with a donation of Milwaukee Journal stock from the family of our founding editor, Lucius Nieman. But instead of spending a sabbatical year at Harvard, O'Brien Fellows come to Marquette to work on a major public service journalism project, which they then bring back to their own newsroom and community. The impact of our O'Brien Fellowship projects has led to several similar partnerships with other universities and foundations. Report for America now helps finance 6 of our reporting positions in Wisconsin, including 3 in Milwaukee. The Pulitzer Center has financed at least a dozen overseas reporting trips for our reporters, and last year helped us pay for an electrician to inspect a scientifically selected sample of homes in Milwaukee's oldest neighborhoods. The result was Wires and Fires, the investigation that Dave referred to earlier. Success begets success. Wires and Fires led to one of our biggest partnership projects this year, The Landlord and the Tenant, which posted online 2 weeks ago and appeared as a special 10-page special section in the November 20th newspaper. We brought together 2 Pulitzer Prize winners for this one, Raquel Rutledge from the Journal Sentinel and Ken Armstrong of ProPublica. They have produced an insightful story revealing a profound injustice in the wake of a fatal house fire. A mother who made a terrible mistake due to her own upbringing is in prison and will remain in prison for years to come. Meanwhile, no one has been held accountable for the fire itself, sparked by substandard wiring behind the walls of a rental home. Not the landlord, not the landlords in our state legislature who took away the power of local governments to inspect rental homes, and not the local officials responsible for enforcing what's left of our inspection rules. In my 43 plus years in journalism, I've never seen a more profound response from readers as we've gotten to this story. Here's just a couple examples. In this social media age of short attention spans, I just spent the last hour devouring every word of your investigation into the Brunner family. I can't remember the last time I read a news story from top to bottom without getting distracted somewhere along the way. This piece is a shining example of why investigative journalism is so important. Bravo for a stellar piece of work, and I'm looking forward to following what impact this piece will have. And another one said, I read your article about the landlord tenant in the Journal this morning and felt like a sledgehammer smashed my heart. And another one to Raquel, Miss Rutledge, you and your colleagues, thank you and your colleagues for a powerful piece of research and your crystalline narrative of a winding, intricate subject. I cannot recall a more affecting piece of journalism in my long life of daily news reading. So we're doing everything we know how to keep doing our most important work, the kind of investigative and explanatory reporting that no one else can do for Milwaukee and Wisconsin. What's getting in our way? The stock market is a great place to be if you have an innovative idea to serve an unmet market need and want to raise a lot of money to build it out to a national scale before a competitor beats you to it. It's a fine place to be if you're an extremely stable business like we were throughout the 20th century and can pay a healthy quarterly dividend to investors interested in preserving their capital. It is not a good place to be if you're an industry in transition and your historic revenue sources are declining. In August, our parent company reported steeper than anticipated declines in income and cash flow. Costs had to be reduced in line with falling income. Layoffs were made across all divisions, including news. Because of our growing digital circulation, the Journal Sentinel newsroom has been spared the brunt of the cuts. But our shareholders are largely made up now of hedge funds, day traders, and mutual funds. Those owners care about one thing: return on investment. They do not care about our mission, our purpose, our unique value to our communities, unless we can explain how all that will eventually show up in a greater return on investment for them. That is what things like growing digital subscription revenue can do if we can prove our work is worth the price of a subscription to enough people. The privately controlled New York Times and privately owned Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, Boston Globe, Minneapolis Star Tribune, Seattle Times, Philadelphia Inquirer, and Tampa Bay Times are well on their way to success doing this. They don't have to worry as much as our company does about quarterly earnings reports, but I do believe we can follow them to success and are on our way to doing so. Every one of you in this room who subscribes to the Journal Sentinel keeps our work going. Every one of you who buys gift subscriptions for a friend or relative keeps this work going. And you can buy them at jsonline.com/gift. It's a giving season. Everyone who donates to our Report for America positions keep this work going, and donations can be made directly to our newsroom at jsonline.com/RFA. We're looking for new ways to keep our most important work alive. The type of work that I described earlier is hard to justify from a business model perspective. It takes a lot of time, and you can't prove how many page views you got or whether that was worth that type of time for a direct income result. So we're looking for new ways to do that. The Seattle Times has done a great job building out and they're a private company as well, working with private foundations to provide grant support for things like mental health coverage, investigative journalism, and they have a huge homeless problem in Seattle and homeless. And we're looking to do the same for crime and juvenile justice coverage, which we have a terrible and growing problem with in our city, and for pre-K and early education to help kids catch up because so many kids are so far behind when they start kindergarten already. And how do we work on these pressing issues when they're hard to justify in a business model perspective? So hopefully we'll have more news on that coming out in the months ahead of how people can contribute to that kind of journalism. And Jim Fitzhenry, who's with us today, is going to lead that effort. In closing, none of the work that I've talked about would have had any impact or any positive change at all if our readers had not responded to it. Politicians and government leaders don't respond to newspaper reporters and editors. They respond to voters. So thank you so much for everything you've done to make these things happen. The Rotary Club, I think, is a shining example of civic engagement and community interest in Milwaukee, and has been for as long as I've been here. And this is exactly you share our values, we share your values, and I hope we can work together in the future to keep this alive. Thank you very much for having me today.
I have been a lifelong subscriber to the paper. I used to subscribe to the Sentinel in the morning, the Journal in the afternoon. I hated it when it went down to one paper. We are on opposite ends of the political arena. Nevertheless, I still found great value in having a daily paper. I'm a commercial real estate broker. The state of Wisconsin requires all agreements to be in writing because the written word is absolute. Broadcast media is wonderful, but the great speeches of our time, from Abraham Lincoln to Martin Luther King to John F. Kennedy, only became iconic when they were reduced to the printed word. Please figure out a way to keep the printed word going.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your subscription. My first job was as a paperboy too, delivering the Morning Sentinel up in Green Bay, which was hard because the houses were pretty far apart. And we had to wake up real early and it snowed a lot.
Thanks for your talk today. Have you explored the philanthropic route? You mentioned one effort. Maybe people are willing to donate in some way to keep journalism alive.
Thank you. Yes, the Ground Truth Project runs Report for America, and they took research that showed that how much of this type of journalism that really keeps democracy alive, coverage of local government, is done by newspapers, not any other form of media. And the research showed that newspapers across the nation had lost 50% of their staff since 2010, and that's only increased since, and that 1,000 newspapers had closed, and many newspapers, many counties didn't even have newspapers anymore. And we know that as reporters that we're the only people that show up at Common Council meetings, that show up at Natural Resources Board meetings, that show up at all of these government places to be. And sometimes just being there is most important, even when nothing major is happening at that meeting. You are the Journal Sentinel. You are the outlet for the people that are at that meeting who know something that the public needs to know. And I remember when I was a reporter, one time a guy followed me out of the room during a break and told me, boy, you maybe should look into this, do a FOIA request here. I don't know if there's any there or not, but there might be. There was, and it led to a great story. Another time a guy followed me out in the parking lot and said, are you going to the next board meeting? I was working in Kansas at the time, way out west of Dodge City, which was hours away from Wichita where I worked. I said, I don't think so. It's too far away. I don't think I can justify going all the way out there for that meeting. There's not much on the agenda. He goes, the whole reason they're having it out there is because they're hoping you won't be there. And that's why there's, all I can tell you is the Kansas Natural Resources Agency is named the Department of Wildlife and Parks, and it wasn't before I went out to that meeting. They had to reorganize the whole agency because of what happened at that meeting. But we're the only ones there. You know, broadcast journalists do some great work, and other people do some great work, but they've never been at those school board meetings. That just isn't what they do. They go to the biggest fire, they go to the biggest event, and they don't have enough people to go to all the other stuff. And that's another reason why we have to keep strong so that we have enough people that we can cover all that stuff and make sure it's being watched. And we'll keep trying. And print is still super important to us. I'm very dismayed myself by the changes that have been made recently. Our parent company decided to move our printing plant from Milwaukee to Peoria, Illinois. That's changed our deadlines severely. It had a big impact. We do, our print subscribers have complete access to everything we do online. And our reporters are working harder than they've ever worked, and they're getting those stories up online. Even our sports reporters are working harder than they've ever worked, and they're doing live analysis during games that you can actually comment to them on, and they're still doing all their other coverage. So just know that that is also available to you as a print subscriber. Jeff Smoller.
Well, congratulations to you and all the journalists that do such excellent work under the conditions. Your stories are very compelling, so thank you. We're coming on 2024, of course, when the spotlight will be on Milwaukee and Wisconsin. And prior to the DNC, certain parts of the Republican Party had some negative things to say about Milwaukee and its leadership and results. And so we're going into 2024 with the perception of a failing public school system, where even schools like Milwaukee Academy of Science are under fire, even though it's a publicly chartered school. We have the crime, which we talked about, and revolving doors, some would say. And then we have the fiscal cliff that insiders in Madison say is partly our own doing here as a city of the first class. So imagine 2024, George, and we started your presentation with headlines that were history. What kind of headlines would you like to write about Milwaukee in 2024, given the issue of public education, given the issue of crime, and given the issue of fiscal responsibility?
Yeah, that's, as we know, some of these problems have been extremely difficult to get at for years and years. I remember when Alan Borsick was covering education for us, he still writes a column for us through the Marquette Law School. But he did a great series on how important principles are. He looked at the greatest principles in Milwaukee and showed how you really, to run a great school in a challenging environment, you need a outstanding principal. And these are not people that work 40 hours a week. These are people that give their lives to their jobs, and they hire great teachers, and they get rid of bad teachers, and they do all that kind of stuff. And most of all, they create an environment of respect and learning throughout the school. And he wrote about that and how those principals know everything that's going on there. And when you look at the successful high schools, I want to go back and do a lot more of this in-depth reporting, similar to what we've done on mental health care through the years, and really go back and look at what makes a school successful. I think we're going to find that's still the case, and that the schools that are the new schools that are doing great, like the Jesuit school on the south side, that is a choice school and it's graduating all its kids, and they're the first kids to go to college in their families. You're finding these great principles again. Now, those schools also have a lot of family support, and that's where we found in the past, when we've embedded reporters in school systems, you can see a lot of breakdown. You know, where if there's a dysfunctional family situation because of all the trauma that's gone on, like the family I described with the fire, if a person was raised a certain way and thinks it's okay to do that, it's hard to be a teacher in that situation. We went to we had a reporter embedded in Marva Collins School a long time ago, when it was a charter school. And it was amazing some of the difficulties those teachers faced. A parent would drop a child off and never come back for 3 days. Things like that. So how do you deal with that? Well, we have to figure out how to deal with it. We have to find successful ways of going to places. We have a reporter here that used to work for us, James Burnett, and now he works for the sheriff, who did a spectacular job with this kind of solutions-based reporting. How many years ago was that, James? 15 years ago? Went to Boston. And James, Boston city size population is similar to Milwaukee's. And their murder rate had been very similar to Milwaukee's too, but then it had gone way, way down and stayed down. It went up a little bit in recent years, but not nearly what ours did. And now it's going back down again. And what James found was, again, these super committed people. This is why this is a great audience to talk to today about this. These super committed community advocates. They were two doctors, and they gave up their careers basically to work with police and with pastors in the city of Boston, inner city pastors. One thing they did was they figured out who the real bad apples were. You know, the sociopaths, the gang leaders that can really cause a lot of trouble and make a lot of people follow them, and they dealt with them. They made sure they were convicted in the judicial system and penalized for what they were doing. There weren't very many of them. The vast majority of people were people that just needed to be put on a good path and shown what that path was. And that's where the pastors that knew the families and these two doctors, and they'd get these neighborhood groups together, and the police would actually get to know the families and show up at a kid's house. And I remember the first house he went to with a policeman and a pastor. The child was just overwhelmed. I think he was a teenager, that somebody even knew his name and cared about him enough to show up. and that kid was put on a path towards success. So we need to find those examples, bring them home, and then do it. Milwaukee sometimes doesn't follow through. Art Jones went to Boston, came back, a task force was established, and nothing happened. So, hi, Betsy.
George, you've had some good success getting individual foundations and other organizations in town to sponsor individual reporting projects. Would you talk a little bit about that in case anyone in the room knows another foundation that would like to step up and become a sponsor?
Yes, thank you very much. In fact, Mary McCormick put us in touch with St. A's a couple of years ago, and they sponsored a major project of ours, which was fantastic. And I think it came out of the Rotary originally. But that was one group that sponsored some of our work. The Greater Milwaukee Foundation has sponsored several major projects of ours. Marquette and Marquette's Law School, the Lubar Fund at Marquette's Law School has financed several major projects of ours. UWM's Freshwater Institute financed Dan Egan right out of our newsroom. They sponsored some of his great investigative work, and so did the O'Brien Fellowship. And he ended up being so successful with his book, The Death and Life of the Great Lakes, that he's now a full-time author and doesn't work for us anymore. But we have to replace him. And we finally, this is the problem. When you lose a person like Dan Egan at a time when you're cutting costs, you don't replace him. And it's so frustrating. We were covering the Great Lakes like no news organization in America. And we lost it, but now we've gained it back through Report for America. Caitlin Luby and Madeline Heim are two environmental writers who Report for America is financing. That's the easiest way to contribute right now as a individual, is to go to that RFA site. And as we develop more partners who can accept local donations or small donations, then I'd like to publicize that and maybe come back and talk to you guys again and let you know about it and update you on that, if that's okay. One more question.
I admire the Washington Post's alliterative motto, "Democracy dies in darkness," which could just as easily apply to the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel. So would you be able to share a few examples of how, given the stakes across our nation and world, how you and your fellow survivors in this tough market and these changing times are able to join forces instead of fighting against each other? As in the old days, that was cool. That was competition, and that was how it was done. But this is a different dynamic.
You're exactly right. Thank you. I worked at the Sentinel too, and the Sentinel and Journal were like this. You couldn't walk through the other person's newsroom without getting daggers stared at you, and people saying, "What are you doing here?" That's how much it was competitive, let alone with everybody else. We're not doing that a lot. If we find people that share our values, we'll work with anybody. So Wisconsin Watch in Madison is a nonprofit investigative group that we work with. ProPublica is a nonprofit investigative group that we work with. There's a lot of other groups that we work with. And we will continue to work with. We work with the minority newspapers and news organizations in the city, and a lot of times we'll do something where we work with the neighborhood news service. A lot of times we'll do something where we think is a public service, and we'll give it to the Courier and other places for free if they want to use it, so they can do that because that's just a public service. And the other thing we need to do is reach the areas of rural Wisconsin and small town Wisconsin that aren't getting adequately served now. And that's a nut we haven't cracked yet. And we've got to figure that out, because we're hoping that the public investigator helps, because we'll go anywhere to chase those stories down. But we need more than that. I don't know. So when I was a reporter, it was a long time ago. And, it just was a different world, because so many families grew up with newspapers, knew what they were all about, got their news, and were informed that way. Now there's been a couple generations where that hasn't been the case in a whole lot of homes. And I don't think people understand as well what's an independent source of news, what's a source of news financed by the same people financing the political campaigns on the internet or worse. And it's causing a lot of confusion out there. And so, for example, I'll just give an example. And this would have been the case if it was Democrats doing it, and we did it when Democrats were doing other things as Republicans. But in this case, it was Michael Gableman's investigation of the 2020 election in Wisconsin. When I was a reporter, the first story we wrote about that farce of an investigation would have led to it ending right then and there. The Republican Party wouldn't have put up with it in those days. Neither party would have. If it was Democrats doing it, they wouldn't have put it. They would have been embarrassed. And the public would have responded so strongly to using taxpayer dollars, flushing them down the toilet on that joke of an investigation, that it would have just ended with the first story. It never ended. It kept going for a whole year, no matter how many stories we did on it. And that's what scares the hell out of me. Thank you.